Requested Chairperson and whole-time member SEBI, Director NISM, distinguished guests, speakers, and participants, a very good morning to all of you. I, Dr. Dipali Dikshit, on behalf of SEBI and NISM, is delighted to welcome you all to the 4th SEBI-NISM Research Conference. I am extremely privileged to welcome Chairperson SEBI, Ms. Madhabi Puri Buch, our whole-time member, Shri Ananth Narayan Gopalakrishnan, and Director NISM, Shri CKG Nair. May I request you all to please join us on stage. Dr. Rachana, please join us on stage, ma'am. I'm also honored to welcome all researchers and other participants of the conference. Thank you all for joining us today. Let us begin today's auspicious event with the praise of the most merciful and the most benevolent. May I request dignitaries on the dais to please join us for lighting of the lamp and for Saraswati Vandana.
Ya kundendu tushara dhavala Ya shubhravastamvrita Ya veena varadanda manditakara Ya shveta padmasana Ya brahmachyuta shankara प्रभुतिभिः देवै सदा वन्दिता सा मां पातु सरस्वती भगवती निःशेषजाड्यापः निःशेषजाड्यापः निःशेषजाड्यापः.
Thank you all. So here we are, assembled for deliberating on the topics related to the securities market. The conference is a platform to bring together academicians, researchers, practitioners, and policymakers. We started this journey 4 years ago, and we faced tough times in between due to the pandemic, but our journey continued unhindered. I think the spirit behind taking challenging efforts to make the event successful can be well explained through these lines. सफर की हद है वहां तक कि कुछ निशान रहे, चले चलो जहां तक ये आसमान रहे. ये क्या उठाए कदम और आ गई मंजिल, ये क्या कि उठाए कदम और आ गई मंजिल, मजा तो जब है कि पैरों में कुछ थकान रहे. So we are putting our best efforts to make this event a successful one. Capital markets provide individuals and institutions with opportunities to invest. While investments do not guarantee financial gain and are accompanied with the risk of loss, such investments can produce greater returns over the long run. The securities laws are designed to require public companies to disclose and report relevant information necessary to make an informed decision. Rather than eliminating risk, these requirements empower investors to make their own determinations on the risk tolerance in pursuit of potential financial returns. Indian securities markets are well placed to keep on contributing significantly to the growth of the capital markets. Many exciting developments are already underway. In this context, the conference adopted a timely theme: Indian securities market, the next agenda. The conference is going to discuss a number of important questions, such as the inspiring practices relevant for emerging markets in case of sustainable finance, innovation and investor protection, future of asset management. We also will have the opportunity to listen to our young researchers. Now, not taking much of your time, I invite Dr. CKG Nair, Director NISM, to deliver the opening address for the conference. Before joining the Securities Appellate Tribunal in 2016, Mr. Nair was an officer of the Indian Economic Services for about 31 years and held various positions in Government of India. He was involved in substantive policy law institutional reforms in the financial sector in these capacities. I request Dr. Nair to please share a few words with us.
Thank you, Dr. Dipali, for that short, crisp introduction. Very warm welcome to all of you once again to the fourth conference edition of this conference. Very happy to see real people as part of the conference, because probably the time may not be far away when we will have chat GPT written articles evaluated by similar tools and attended by AI run robots. And if only some real human beings are allowed, probably we may see some faces. So probably we are reaching that stage. So that is why I'm saying very happy to see the real faces. Along with welcoming all of you to this two-day deliberations, let me also share a few thoughts on the approach to regulation and how to balance the approach to regulation with the capability building for regulation. These are some of the old themes, but the old themes are important because some of the regulators and central banks in the world recently have adopted a policy or an approach of whatever it takes. And the circumstances force them to adopt such an approach. But this whatever it takes approach cannot continue. We need a sound and a holistic overarching philosophy for any regulatory agency to succeed on an ongoing basis. Otherwise, it will be like in the movie, like what is goats must be crazy. Some of you would not have seen that, but you don't have to struggle to watch that movie. You can simply watch the securities market, Indian or global or both. So you will understand what is the meaning of that movie itself. So the broad theme of today's conference is Indian securities market, the next agenda, as Dipali has already mentioned. But what is new about this agenda? The answer lies in the beauty of the securities or financial markets, that the agenda is never a fixed matrix. And in fact, you can't fix the matrix even for a day. Even the current agenda is not settled. It's an ever-changing, ever-growing, ever-challenging, mountainous, marshy, tropical jungle of the past. Why I say past? Because there are no such tropical jungle as well these days. So you have to imagine, or only those who have lived 50 years ago could have seen that. With several wild animals, not just bears and bulls, which need to be researched, analyzed, and studied repeatedly to get some idea of its shape, colors, contours, and behavior. Regulation of market needs reasonably strong understanding of these complexities. Of course, anyone who wants to beat the market or time the market may also need some reasonable understanding, but never use that wisdom to beat the regulator, because they are always smarter than them, and they must be the smartest. The task of the market regulator is particularly difficult, as against a prudential regulator, which many of you would know the difference. Accepting this basic premise makes life a little easier for the regulator, because that makes the regulator to strive for building capabilities and to develop the tools to fight the big battles, some known or expected, others unknown and unexpected. Psychologist author Scott Peck has written a book titled The Road Less Traveled. It starts with an assertion. I am repeating, it's an assertion, not a hypothesis, because we are all familiar with hypothesis in research. But this is an assertion that life is very difficult. And if you start understanding that, then it becomes easier. But market, and though it is about the human mind, markets are no less smart than human mind. And I know all of you know the definition of human mind, that it is a mad drunken monkey bitten by a scorpio. And the markets are a combination of this thing plus the God must be crazy type example I have just mentioned. A market regulator is tasked with too many responsibilities. We have a lot of stories where some other regulators or the central banks were asked to take a regulatory task of everything in the financial market. With one central bank governor, I won't use any name or any country's name these days. It's very dangerous. So they are avoiding all those things. The central bank governor apparently told the prime minister, not our country, that much I can disclose, that we are not here to regulate all Tom, Dick and Harry. And regulatory task was taken out of the governor. The prime minister told, okay, fine, you don't regulate anything. You only do monetary policy. Okay. So regulate, promote, and protect the investors are part of this broad task. In actual practice, but translating these broad responsibilities expand into a huge number or array of tasks, each one needing tremendous capabilities. They need to make regulations and administer them, investigate and adjudicate violations, pass quasi-judicial orders, defend their orders before the judiciary, respond to the millions of mutinies of market participants, fulfill parliamentary accountability, and so many such big and several mundane things they have to be dealt with. Given such complexity and the varied functions of the regulator, it's essential to have an overarching design, an approach to regulation or a philosophy of regulation where I started with. We cannot have an approach to whatever it takes unless we have an overview. We cannot like the internet, which is ever expanding and into different areas which doesn't have any borders or any well-defined pattern. So some of the big questions in setting that such a philosophy of regulation would be whether to follow a light touch regulation, proportionate regulation, or a heavy-handed regulation. It's up to them, provided the law permits. Whether to give equal importance to regulation and development of markets, which at times can be conflicting. Whether to protect the investors on equal terms or provide greater protection to some, like the small investors. And small investor definition itself is made in controversies, but in addition, protecting whether they need protection in the light of the fact that reportedly 5 crore investors have entered the cryptos before probably a lot of countervailing measures have started against crypto. But when, if at all you do protect some part of the investors, with your extra love, it should not lead to strangulation like a Dhritarashtra's hug. So you have to be careful about that also, because in our over anxiety to protect some investors, small investors particularly, we may, so like the traditional phrase is that throw the baby with the bathwater type of situation, or a Dhritarashtra's hug. So whether to follow a principle-based approach broadly, may not be fully, or a rule or discretion-based approach to regulation, whether to proactively chase only the big ticket violation. This is a very big issue because the number of mishaps or violations, if you call it, if it is proved, after it is proved, happens in the securities market is very, very high, given the large number of participants, both investors and the intermediaries and other participants. And so it is essentially and fundamentally difficult for the regulator to cope up with all those violations or perceived violations in reasonable time limit. And if you don't do that in reasonable time limit, it doesn't serve any purpose, because given the speed with which market, product, and processes change, an action after 10 years down the line, and these days, in fact, you may not be even sure whether those entities exist, because the corporate lifespan has shrunk from reportedly from 100 years to around 20 years to now less than 10 years. And with the oldest company, but is supposed to be about 1200 years old, which is still surviving, I am told, in Japan. And so we need to take action. So we have to prioritize The law strictly doesn't distinguish between small violation and the big violation, which I am fully conscious of. Whether to encourage some products like mutual funds over others, or discourage some like derivatives or AIF, etc. These are all discouraged for small investors, I mean, not for the market as a whole. These and several other regulatory design questions or philosophy questions lead to questions on how to do them, like how to develop the bond derivatives nexus in India, which does not want to bloom despite considerable efforts by all the financial sector regulators combined for several years. So can you take the course? You may be able to take it to the pond, but can you force it to drink? How to raise the standards of corporate governance, which in itself will give a lot of comfort to the regulator. Or if I borrow the words of Mr. R. Gopalakrishnan, who is an eminent expert on corporate governance, how to develop SHEs, that is sustainable, honest, enlightened enterprises. And maybe the answer is that the SHEs should lead the companies to develop SHEs. I don't have an answer. But let me also tell you, there is some evidence, increasing evidence that she managed companies actually tend to become SHEs as or entities. And in the last conference, which was held in NASM in December, the top prize went to a paper which dealt with this theme of women-managed companies. I mean, I don't want to say that the men are no less this thing, no comparison, just I am reporting only what happened. How to regulate the lightweight business models with gravity-defying valuations and ambitions, and those taking takeovers, sharpening their who eat to whom first strategies, like the Hanuman Lenga Lashmi tussle. And it is interesting to see that these days, I mean, when I watch the TV discussions, till a few months back, the discussions were centering around how to become a billion-dollar company. But yesterday, I was very surprised that most of the discussions were how to become a $100 billion company. So the goalposts have changed, not just, in a natural growth trajectory, but in very, very dynamic terms, to use it in a very sophisticated language. The regulatory philosophy has to address an irony of human minds as well. Because in normal times, people want the market regulator to just follow only a light touch approach to regulation, with many seeking active support for market innovations and market or even business development. However, in difficult times, the same people expect the regulator to become a superhero and to manage the perfect storm, unleashed either by systemic risks or catastrophes like the global financial crisis, or man-made disasters like occasionally created by individual entities. Of course, with some of them may run into systemic catastrophes. But these superlatives are not easy to understand normally, whether it is a disaster or catastrophe. So those who have any doubt, remember the statement made by Benjamin Disraeli, one time Prime Minister and alternate time opposition leader, on his counterpart, one time Prime Minister and alternate time opposition leader, William Gladstone, that he said, if William Gladstone fell into the Thames, it would be a misfortune, but if anybody pulled him out, it would be a calamity. In short, during difficult times, the regulator has to suddenly expand its capabilities and secure the market as well as the market participants from drowning, not only from heightened volatility, but also from systemic instability. Though the central banks generally claim monopoly mandate over systemic stability issues, fungibility of finance and boundaryless domestically and borderless globally financial markets have ensured that all regulators, wherever multiple regulators exist, have some role in financial stability. Large corporates with huge treasury operations and other too big to fail non-banking and non-financial conglomerates make financial stability a task of the market regulator as well. These thoughts are some broad brushes on financial market regulation. The practical question, however, is how do you build up enough regulatory capacity and capability to regulate markets and promote market integrity, not only during normal times, but also during challenging times that periodically visit economies and at times the global economic system as a whole. Many say during crisis, the regulators were sleeping. A market regulator cannot sleep, particularly with an integrated global financial market full of events unfolding every minute. It's a question of designing the foundation and building up capabilities and the right tools through knowledge to keep constant vigil, to be able to front-run products, practices, and behavior of the market players. An ever-changing financial market needs an ever-dynamic regulatory response. Such responses cannot be articulated well and in advance, including its legal architecture, unless the regulators are at the frontiers of informed regulation making, just like we say informed policy making, and creating innovative tools using the latest technology and data gathering and management systems. Maybe regulators should seek, in this light of data gathering, regulators should also seek approval for floating balloons and unidentified flying objects over global financial centers and offshore heavens. The information buildup of the market regulator needs to be 360-degree, even in a multiple regulatory environment, though with direct responsibility of regulating only a segment of the market. However, it would cost the regulator as well as the regulated entities who transcends their operation beyond the artificially constructed boundaries of the subsectors. The cost of dividing regulation of the domestic financial market is far greater than the cost of a unified regulation. Divided regulator architecture also has to struggle with strategies to regulate similar activities by entities in other segments. A case in point is the draft guidelines on minimum capital requirements for market risk for banks trading book exposures issued by the RBI in February recently. And there are so many other instances of both regulatory cooperation where they cooperate, and there are also a few examples when they fought with each other and amongst one another. The ever-increasing role of technology in financial services, data management, trading, and several new frontiers being opened up at great speed are new challenges for the regulators. So is the case of regulating externalities like environmental and sustainability issues. Conferences and research collaborations are important avenues for fundamentally strengthening and upgrading the capability of regulators and keeping them abreast with contemporary and at times futuristic developments in financial markets. That's essential for designing the regulatory philosophy as well as for creating the right kind of regulatory tools. That's why regulators like SEBI, despite their preoccupation with many immediate and explosive issues, often created by heroes and anti-heroes, with role reversals at times in the corporate market financial junction, are focusing their attention on understanding the medium and long-term issues on market through research-based knowledge. With discussions by eminent experts, I know there are many of them, and many of them are present in this audience, and excellent papers on several topics by researchers exploring these and several other themes on market microstructure as they stand today and as they are seen tomorrow. I'm sure we will learn a lot in strengthening our understanding of the capital markets or even in general in the financial markets, including on their regulation. I will also give, and it will also give an agenda for the future research, the next agenda. We look forward to all those takeaways, and I wish the conference all success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So thank you so much, sir, for sharing your thoughts with us today. I consider it a great honor to invite our whole-time member, Shri Ananth Narayan ji, to deliver the theme address of the conference. Mr. Ananth Narayan is looking after the Market Intermediaries Regulation and Supervision Department, Alternative Investment Fund and Foreign Portfolio Investors Department, Integrated Surveillance Department, Department of Economic and Policy Analysis, and Information Technology Department. He is also at present a member of the Board of Governors at NISM. Prior to the current assignment, Mr. Ananth Narayan held the position of Associate Professor, SPJAN Institute of Management and Research, Mumbai. Prior to that, he had more than 2.5 decades of experience in banking and financial markets and has held various senior positions. He also served as a director on the boards of various organizations and has been a member of various advisory committees constituted by SEBI and RBI. I request that to please share his thoughts with us today.
Thank you very much, Dipali, and respected SEBI Chairperson, respected Dr. Nair, Dr. Baid, dignitaries from the industry, participants, colleagues from NISM and SEBI. It's really a pleasure and privilege to be here at this beautiful campus of NISM. I have an admission to make. This is the first time I'm coming to NISM. I know I should have come earlier, and I am going to spend some time here. It's a beautiful campus already. Professors and teachers like to speak a lot, but I'm conscious that you're eager to listen to the chairperson, so I'll try and keep this as short as possible within those constraints. Dr. Nair gave a very nice overview of all the challenges that regulators face. In fact, the entire ecosystem faces, particularly as times change. The good news for us is, as far as regulators are concerned, our agenda is very, very clear, and it's enshrined, for instance, in the case of SEBI, in the SEBI Act itself. We have 3 principal objectives and pillars. 1, investor protection. 2, market development. 3, market regulation. So every time we are confused with a plethora of options in front of us, all we have to do is remind ourselves of these 3 key pillars, and each of these pillars are taken very, very seriously. In fact, in the previous board meeting, post the board meeting, our chairperson mentioned this particular statistic. 45% of all the changes which SEBI had brought about in this fiscal year till December were towards market development. We take each of those pillars very, very seriously. So we constantly have to remind ourselves on that front. We've also got a very good thing going right now with this formalization and this financialization of savings. It's definitely helping the services the securities ecosystem. So one statistic which SEBI and NSE, in fact, gave in a presentation a few days back. So if you look at the total amount of retail or individual-oriented savings going into the equity markets across individuals, across mutual funds, across DIIs like insurance companies, etc., all of that put together today is at 47.5% of the free float of the NSE. And that's an all-time high. Okay, so in fact, the significance of the foreign holdings in the overall NSE portfolio has come down to below 39%. And all this has happened not because foreigners are going out. It's actually because everybody's coming in and domestic savings are actually going even higher. So there's a good thing going there in terms of helping the securities ecosystem. But obviously, there's a lot to be done. In fact, Dr. Nair referred to some of the challenges that we face constantly. Now, what does it mean for all of us here? I think each of the stakeholders represented in this audience, whether it is industry, whether it is academia, whether it is regulators, whether it is media, whether it is commentators, whether it's the public, all of us have a shared responsibility towards ensuring that this ecosystem grows. Those 3 pillars that I mentioned, they all point towards one common goal, which is we should have consistent and sustainable capital formation. India needs it, our country needs it, and this is our overarching goal that we should be building towards. For this goal to be achieved, it's not just the regulator's job or the industry's job. We all have to work together. And what we need is for each of these stakeholders to speak to each other, to listen to each other. Now, I've had the privilege of actually playing the role in 3 parts of the stakeholders. I've been in the industry for a long time. I was in academia for nearly 5 years. And now I'm a regulator for the last 4.5, 5 months. Okay. Admittedly, it's not a very symmetric distribution. Nevertheless, I think there are issues for all stakeholders as far as this conversation goes. In industry, because we are grappling with so many things, short-term things, it's very difficult for us to keep abreast of the new things that are coming about. We don't learn enough. In fact, I have to share this very embarrassing secret with you. At the age of 48, when I left industry, I tried to start doing a PhD program. And I spoke to a few professors, including Professor Marty Subramaniam of NYU, on is it a good idea for somebody who is going to soon cross the wrong side of 50 to actually go into a PhD program. And he gave me a statistic which stayed in my mind. Apparently, research shows that we are at a creative best between the ages of 30, 35, at most 40. Thereafter, we are living off our past laurels rather than creating anything new. That's a very disconcerting thought for me. I think the only way you combat that is by constantly reminding yourself that if you stop learning, you are aging already. You are young until the day that you're actually learning every day. Irrespective of, and people like Navneet are a good example of this, irrespective of how busy you are or how old you are, you've got to set aside some time for learning, to listening to the industry, to the academia, to learning new things. Look at today's day and age. Technology. How do you keep your customers' assets safer? How do you reach out to your clients better? There is so much that technology can offer. In fact, ChatGPT, sir mentioned, there is so much that technology can offer on those fronts. Things like ESG, which we will be discussing in the later in the program, so relevant to ensuring the sustainability of capital formation. Lots to learn. As industry, please listen to what research has to offer and make sure that you're learning from there and incorporating that into your business strategies. Second part, academia. Now, I was there for 5 years, and some of these things might not sound good. I'm giving you a very personal experience of my experience with academia. Sometimes I find some parts of academia are too inward looking and not necessarily focused on conversing with the industry. I had this very interesting experience with a very senior professor while I was a professor myself, associate professor myself. That professor's aim was to publish X number of papers in a year. And when I talked about, so what do these papers lead to in terms of influencing practice, that question kind of was not seen as a relevant question. It's that I have to publish papers. So, there is old Hindi song, which I'm very fond of. It's an Amir Khan movie. Have you heard of the song, this Ghungat ki aad se Dilbar ka? Usme there's one line, Jab tak na mile nazaron se nazar, shringar adhura rehta hai. So if your intended party doesn't see you and doesn't appreciate you, there is no point of having a shringar of any kind. I think that applies to research as well. If you're doing a research in a vacuum and it's not being absorbed by the people in the industry, either because industry is not listening or because you're not doing a good job of picking up the right topics, there's a problem. Doing research for the sake of research does not make sense. It has to be, especially in our industry, in our ecosystem, it has to be relevant to industry. It has to influence practice. It has to be thought leadership. A last bit on regulators. The constant dilemma that we face, which Dr. Nair also referred to in a little bit, is to ensure that we are focusing on all those three pillars that I mentioned, whether it is in investor protection, market development, market regulation. There are two kinds of errors that regulators can make, and we are conscious of it every day. The first is we say yes when we should have said no. I call that type 1 errors. We allow a certain thing to happen when actually we shouldn't have allowed it to happen. Okay? So we are constantly bombarded with examples globally of regulators making these type 1 errors. Now, one way of ensuring you don't make any type 1 errors is to say no to everything. Just say no, not allowed. The moment you do that, you run the risk of type 2 errors. What are the type 2 errors? The risk of saying no when you should have said yes. Now, both these type 1 and type 2 errors are critical to us. As I mentioned, we take all those three pillars extremely importantly. So we cannot afford to have either one of these two errors creep up too much. We've got to ensure that market develops. At the same time, you've got to ensure your protection of investors as well as your market regulation. So I'm going to stop here. There are a lot of interesting papers which are being discussed, a lot of interesting panels which are discussing very, very topical issues, things like RegTech and SupTech, things like ESG, things like new products, new markets, how do you grow existing markets, etc. I believe 18 papers are being published or being discussed out of more than 100 applications which came in. My one request to all of you as we move forward, not just today, but going beyond as well, please use this forum, especially the physical presence here, to network. Industry, please speak to academia. Academia, please speak to regulators, and the entire chain should complete. listen to each other, speak to each other, work together. Unless we listen and speak to each other, we are not going to help grow sustainable capital in this country. Okay, we need to take the lead on that. It's not just that we have to, discover everything ourselves. There's a lot of stuff which has already happened globally. We can learn from there. We also might have to take the lead, as we have over several decades, take the lead in certain areas. So I wish this conference every success, more than the specific papers and the discussions. I look forward to many, many networking, opportunities, which will lead to a lot more of sustainable capital formation going forward. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your thoughts with us today. Next distinguished to honor us with her presence is Chairperson SEBI, Ms. Madhabi Puri Buch. Ms. Buch has assumed the office as Chairperson of SEBI with effect from March 2nd, 2022. She served as whole-time member SEBI from April 17 till October 2021, during which she handled various departments in SEBI. Prior to that, she had a career in financial markets and banking of around 3 decades. She served as a consultant to the New Development Bank in Shanghai, head of the Singapore office of the private equity firm Greater Pacific Capital, managing director and chief executive officer at ICICI Securities Limited, and executive director on the board of the ICICI Bank. Ms. Buch also served as a non-executive director on the boards of the various companies. Ma'am, we request you to please share your thoughts with us today.
Thank you very much and a very good morning. It is indeed with great pleasure that I'm here addressing this very august audience. And it's a pleasure for me because I have been associated with NISM right through my last 5 years. And I have always found that this particular conference, which brings together very wide set of people, both from industry and academia, as Ananth said, is a very invigorating mix. And particularly this year's agenda or topic, which is talking about the next agenda, I find it very invigorating because what it means is that today what we will be discussing is what is the focus that SEBI is going to have in the coming year in respect of the securities market. And therefore, we have an opportunity to talk about what is to come and therefore have an opportunity, as Ananth said, to actually influence what is the thinking, what is the decision-making, and what is the participation and consultation that is going to happen over the next 1 year. So with that, I would like to start. I think the context of where we are today is really that India as a country is in a very, very special position. For a long time, it was said that India's time is due, that it will come. I think today we stand in a place where India's time has come. If we look at some of the data and we look at 2022, we find that broadly speaking, the so-called developed countries had grown at about 2.5% in terms of their GDP, around that number. The emerging markets as a whole, as a cohort, had grown at about 4%. India, in comparison, grew at about 6.5%. Not only this, but over the next 2 years, 23 and 24, the expectation is that the developed markets will, in fact, drop their growth rates. They will grow by only about 1.5%. The emerging markets as a whole will continue to maintain their growth rate of about 4%. And India will continue to maintain a leadership position in that by growing at around 6.5%. So as a generation, we are an extremely privileged generation because this is the time when India's growth is outstripping practically the growth of almost every other nation in the country, certainly any on the planet, certainly any large economy in the world. In this context, the role that the markets have to play, and Ananth referred to the fact that the whole purpose of the markets themselves is for capital formation. In our country in particular, the focus needs to be and must be on infrastructure development. Now, we know the multiplier effect that infrastructure development happens. We know what happens when railways reach every nook and corner, when roads reach every village. We know when electricity reaches every household. We know when ports pop up, minor ports, major ports along our entire coastline. The multiplier effect of that on our economy is huge. And therefore, in terms of the next agenda for the next 1 year, SEBI will be focused on the areas of infrastructure finance and real estate finance, which generally go hand in hand together. Towards this end, SEBI has recently set up a new advisory committee to focus on REITs and InvITs, which is basically the funding vehicle for infrastructure and real estate. And what is more interesting and exciting is that this advisory committee has been given a terms of reference which are very different from anything that SEBI has done in the past. This advisory committee has been mandated to say, it's not that SEBI will come up with a bunch of regulations and then we will go to the committee to seek advice. No, it will be that the committee will go out to industry, will go out to the various sectors of infrastructure and real estate development in the country and come back with saying, what is it that the market wants? What is the product that will sell in the market? And SEBI will then craft the regulations around what the market needs. And that crafting of regulation, we will do in as many homogeneous segments as is required. The fundamental belief here is that every single segment of infrastructure will need a different solution. And if the regulation were to try and impose a common standard across all these sectors, it will fail. So the going in assumption is, and over the last few months, we found this indeed to be true. The going in assumption is every segment of infrastructure in the country is large enough to warrant its own set of rules and regulations. And secondly, the needs and requirements that will make it a success are completely different. So the next agenda from SEBI's perspective in terms of capital formation in the economy and in terms of development of the market is going to be focused on how do we bring about customized regulation to facilitate the growth of infrastructure and real estate in our country. The second pillar, as Ananth said just now, of the regulatory mandate is the regulation of the market. One was the development of the market. The second is the regulation of the market. We have already at SEBI started conversations with certain key, what we call third-party fiduciaries in the market, like law firms, like audit firms, like investment bankers. The question that we wish to address in the coming year, and again, we would welcome that if the entire community, the ecosystem, were to support us in this through research, is to focus on the spirit of the law and not just on the letter of the law. So the focus is, what is it that the regulation is meant to achieve? And is that something that we are doing, or are we simply ticking some boxes for technical compliance rather than in-spirit compliance? Now, in all our deliberations with the ecosystem, we have received some very constructive feedback to say that the regulator has an equal role in moving the ecosystem towards this. And it starts simply by saying, is the regulator clear in its communication as to what the spirit of the law is? Or do we simply draft regulation which is legalistically sound, but does not adequately communicate what is it that the regulator is actually, and the regulation is actually trying to achieve, what is actually the spirit of the law? So the ball is in our court, in SEBI's court, to articulate clearly what is the spirit of the law, and then seek the support of the entire ecosystem, the listed companies, the intermediaries, the third-party fiduciaries, the entire ecosystem, to move towards doing what is right, not what is easy. And that definition of right is what will be dictated by our moral compass. all of us as an ecosystem. Now the question is that as part of our regulating the market mandate, it is important not just that we make the regulation, but also that we monitor compliance with that regulation. Now, historically, because SEBI is now a little over 30 years old, historically, there has been a certain way of doing that monitoring. We believe that given the power of data and technology today, we need to completely recast the way that we do supervision of the market and the supervision of the intermediaries. In the last roughly year to 2 years, we have taken certain baby steps in this direction, but clearly the next agenda for the next 1 year for us is about taking now a significant leap in terms of the way in which we do supervision of the market, which is data-driven and technology-enabled, and therefore, hopefully, it will achieve two things. It is much more objective and it is much more comprehensive, because we know that the one demand that technology and data puts on us is that we have to have clarity. There can be no room for interpretation when you run an algorithm. You have to be very clear as to what the interpretation of your regulation is. And therefore, we believe, and this is an early feedback that we have received from some of our intermediaries with whom we've been working on this, is to say that actually there will be a huge relief in the system in terms of supervision, inspection, surveillance, etc., because the rules of the regulation will become so clear and so transparent that there is no need for anybody to double guess what the regulation means, and nor for there to be any prolonged litigation over what the regulation means, because it has been already encoded by way of technology and the underlying data. In terms of the investor, which is the third important leg of SEBI's mandate, the agenda for us going forward in the coming year is twofold. One is inclusion, and we are very conscious of the fact that the markets have inherent risk. That's why it's called market risk. How do we work towards an inclusion agenda without exposing the inclusion categories to unacceptable risk? So this is the agenda that we will be focusing on. And one of the key aspects of this agenda is investor empowerment. We believe that the best protection that any investor can have is to be empowered. What do we mean by that? What we mean is to have equitable information, to have access to information, to have ease of understanding of that information. If we are able to ensure this, then the investor will be extremely empowered, and we will have decision-making in the market which will be based on objective data. We have taken a few steps in this direction. Some of you may have read a recent report, a research report that SEBI published in respect of profit and loss made by retail investors, individual investors in the F&O segment. Now, the findings of that study were startling, to say the least. It found that 90% of all individuals who participated in the F&O segment at the end of the year made losses. So the probability that you will enter the market and exit it with a profit at the end of the year is just 10%. On top of that, when we quantified what is the quantum of loss that these 90% of the people made, it was in the region, I think the average or the median, I forget which it was, perhaps median or average, was 70,000 rupees per person. On top of this, an additional roughly 35,000 was lost by them by way of transaction charges. Now you can imagine 90% of all people who have traded in F&O have lost on an average about 1 lakh of rupees. This information is a very important piece of information which anybody desiring to enter the market must be made aware of. So while there are a large number of influencers in the market who will exhort you to enter the market and will say that it is so easy for you to make 10 lakhs a month and 20 lakhs a month and 3 crores in the year and all of that, but this is the stark reality. This is the stark reality which has data behind it. And this is the power of research. This is the power of data, which we hope we will use extensively to bring about empowerment of the investors. I would also like to touch upon some very important themes which are emerging globally. ESG is certainly one of them. And since it's an emerging field, there is a lot of research and a lot of data which is now being looked at in terms of ESG. At SEBI's end, we have already published, and which accounts for the slide that you see there, we have already published guidelines not just about green finance, but also blue finance and yellow finance. Blue finance is where financing is going towards all aspects related to water conservation. And the yellow finance is all areas which is going towards the harnessing of solar energy and alternative sources of energy. So the framework already exists. There is also a lot of focus. We have 2 consultation papers out in the market as we speak, which will bring in, and that will form the basis of our agenda for the next 1 year in the ESG space, which is what should be the disclosure requirements for corporates in respect of ESG? What should be the disclosure requirements for people, the rating agencies who give ESG ratings? What kind of disclosures they need to make about their ratings? And thirdly, the mutual funds and others who are investors in ESG and therefore go to their investors and talk about ESG schemes. What are the disclosures that they need to make so that we have a very transparent ecosystem in respect of ESG going forward? Here, I would say that the next agenda for us is focused on 2 areas. The first is actually simplification. We have identified that while the ESG disclosure requirements globally are quite onerous, and we have indeed mandated them for the top section of our listed companies, in terms of assurance, so beyond stating what is those parameters, to get an assurance on those parameters is a very, very onerous task. And therefore, what we have proposed in our consultation paper is that that we must have assurance, but trying to get assurance on that very large data set is very onerous for our markets and our listed companies. And therefore, we've identified what we call BRSR core, which is the business responsibility reporting that we have, a core part of it, which is a very, very abridged form of ESG reporting. And the roadmap for assurance will start with that core BRSR so that we are not making it hugely onerous on the ecosystem for reporting or for giving assurance in terms of the ESG reporting. This is one very critical aspect of the next year's agenda, to actually simplify ESG reporting so that it can be assured. The second aspect of a very important aspect for the next 1 year is how do we contextualize ESG for the Indian environment, which in a larger context is an emerging markets environment. So again, our papers, our consultation papers talk about some of the areas where the ESG ratings, on the one hand, needing to comply with global standards because it is a globalized world and capital flows are global, and therefore we need to make sure our companies are compliant with global standards. But in addition to that, there needs to be an adjusted score or a parallel score which reflects the reality of emerging markets in general and India in particular. So we would really look forward to a lot more data and a lot more research in this area. As Ananth mentioned earlier, the markets are so dynamic in each of these areas, as you've seen, while we have identified our agenda for the next year, it is very important that not only the regulator keeps itself abreast of all of these developments, but the entire ecosystem keeps itself abreast. Now, in this, we believe that the tool of certification, that here is a bunch of subjects on which up-to-date information and knowledge is available. And if individuals like you and me get ourselves certified in these areas, that becomes the key, and literally the key, that will open the doors for us to be able to collaborate in a much more constructive way and in a much more forward-looking way. So, since NISM is the certifying authority for all the market participants, I would urge both NISM on the one hand and the market participants on the other to take the process of certification to the next level. Not just as a tick box that we have to comply with in order to be eligible to participate in the market, but actually to upgrade our skills and to be very contemporary in terms of what we do and what we know. And that will be a vibrant and very knowledge-based and data-based ecosystem that the securities market will have. As you can see, in everything that I have said, you've probably seen the underpinning of the emphasis on data. And that is indeed so. People who know me well know that without data, there is nothing. Today, every single policy matter which is deliberated in SEBI, the starting point is the data. And everything that we do, we backtest and see what will be the impact on the market. We do it with data. So this belief in data is a very, very strong belief, which is why we have also, as part of our agenda, not just this year, which we will take forward, but for the last, I would say, couple of years, a lot of focus on data democratization and making data available to the market in order to facilitate research by all of the people who are here sitting before us and participating virtually, and to facilitate more and more knowledge creation. The underlying data should be available as a public good and should be available in a very timely fashion to the entire market. But I would like to end now on a lighter note. We all, of course, have heard about various things that have been said about data. There are famous words saying there are lies, damned lies, and statistics. There are people who say if you torture the data enough, it will tell you anything. But indeed, in today's world, slicing, dicing, and drilling down into the data is a basic not only skill set that each one of us needs to have, but it has also become the way in which all decision making is done, and it is the basis on which all participants, all stakeholders sit down to discuss their perspectives and to reach a very objective and data-based consensus. With that, I would like to end my address. And I thank you so much for being here. I thank you so much for all the researchers who have submitted, as I understood, over 100 papers. And of course, warmest congratulations to all those who are presenting today and to the winners of various categories. My very, very warmest regards. Thank you.
It will be a great pleasure for us to listen to you again. Now I invite Dr. Rachana Baid, Professor NISM, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Morning to all of you. Somebody has very rightly said, research propels humanity forward. It is fueled by curiosity. Without curiosity and research, progress will come to a halt. Conducting research in securities market is not only important, it is imperative. It is intrinsic to every decision we make as participants. It is intrinsic to every rule which the regulator frames. The quantity of research in the last 2-3 decades have grown enormously. However, sometimes questions are raised about its width, applicability, ability to benefit the investors, intermediaries, regulators, economy, and society. I thank our guest of honor, Madam Madhabi Puri Buch, Chairperson NISM SEBI, for laying down the roadmap for the securities market. She has given us many potential research ideas. I'm sure the research community which is sitting here would now know what to look for to come up with work which would be relevant to the market as well as to the regulator. To bridge the gap between academia, research, academia and the industry, these are the areas going forward would be useful. I thank Mr. Ananth Narayan, old-time member SEBI, for the theme address. The takeaway from your address, sir, is learning is constant. And the bridge which you have, the gap which you have talked about between academia and research, very rightly you have pointed out, research for the sake of it probably is not to be done. I'm sure we all have made a note of it and we do accept that. I thank our director, Dr. C.K.G. Nair, for his support, guidance, and encouragement. His remarks have set the ball rolling for the conference to go for the next 2 years in his characteristic super witty style. I appreciate the efforts of team NISM and SEBI for successfully holding this conference year after year. Importantly, I thank you all in the audience, my faculty colleagues, staff members at NISM, officers of SEBI, researchers, authors, co-authors, and my dear student for your participation and presence. Thank you very much.
With this announce the completion of the inaugural session, and we will be looking forward towards some policy inputs in the coming 2 days. After a small tea break, we can move forward to the first session of the conference, discussion on reads and invits. Request all of you to kindly adhere to the time limits for the breaks. I will end the inaugural session with the following lines. Believe in yourself and you can achieve things you never thought possible. Believe in yourself and you can discover new talents hidden inside of you. Believe in yourself and you can reach new heights that you thought immeasurable. Believe in yourself and you can explain the problem that defies every solution. Thank you. The next will be here only in the auditorium. Please come back.